We have some breaking news out of Minnesota. General Manager Paul Fenton has been fired. In today's video, we're going to take a look at all the moves he's made during his one-year tenure as GM and discuss some things going on behind the scenes that we just learned of today. We'll get into all that coming up next. So welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have some breaking news out of the Wild organization where they've decided to let go of GM Paul Fenton after just over 1 year. He's only been on the job for 14 months, but apparently ownership has not been happy and they're ready for a change here already. So as I mentioned as well, I want to take a look at the moves that he's made which might have led to this, as well as some of the things going on behind the scenes that we just learned of as well. I'm now going to share with you some clips from an Athletic article that was just posted discussing him being fired and looks at his recent moves that he's made as GM, as well as the stuff going on behind the scenes that we just learned of. The article starts here saying, Fenton's most notable moves as Wild GM started last summer when he signed defenseman Greg Pattern and forwards Eric Fair, Matt Hendricks, and JT Brown. All were moves that were tweaked the fourth line and third pair defense, but didn't eat into a core that was coming off his fourth first-round exit in a 6-year postseason run. Last season, in a 5-week span, Fenton acquired Brad Hunt and Pontus Aberg, claimed Anthony Bitetto off waivers, and traded Nino Niederreiter, Charlie Coyle, and Mikael Granlund. The returns for the latter were respectively Victor Rask, Ryan Donato, and Kevin Fiala. The Bitetto pickup a day after acquiring Hunt triggered a series of events that helped derail a team that was steadily rolling at the time. While the team has high hopes for Donato and Fiala, the Niederreiter trade stung as he went on to shine in Carolina, while Rask has struggled to stay on the ice with the Wild. Entering this season, Rask likely is going to be relegated to a fourth-line role with no special teams responsibility, despite having 3 years left on his contract at $4 million per season. Now, Fenton also nearly traded Jason Zucker at the trade deadline to the Calgary Flames on the same day he signed Eric Staal to a 2-year extension, rather than trading him to what sources said was the Boston Bruins. Also got out in June that Zucker would have been traded to the Penguins had Phil Kessel waived his no-trade clause. Now, as we've discussed here multiple times, Fenton seemed to have it in for Zucker. He really wanted to trade this guy, and I'm not really sure why. 2 failed attempts, and there's also some information in there as well that you might not have heard before, indicating that the Boston Bruins are very close to acquiring Eric Staal right before he signed that contract extension with Minnesota. Beyond that, sources said there were numerous accounts of unhappy employees throughout the organization and countless other turbulent incidents that made their way into Leipold's office. Sources said for weeks it was becoming abundantly clear to Leipold that Fenton was not fitting in to the culture that he and CEO Matt Matchka had worked to create since Leipold purchased the team back in 2008. So rather than giving Fenton another year's chance to right the ship on the ice and off, Leipold obviously felt he'd better pull the plug now rather than allow further potential damage to come. While there's little doubt Fenton was blindsided by Tuesday's phone call, it's believed he knew he was on thin ice after meetings with Leipold about his job performance this offseason. Leipold's antenna has been up, which explains why he has wanted to be in the know on several of Fenton's decisions, sitting in on the scouting meetings and staying to the right of Fenton on day 1 of the draft. It's not out of character, but Leipold was also in the war room on July 1st, the opening day of free agency, and he has wanted to know about all the trade talks. It's believed Fenton has 2 years left on his contract at around $1 million per year, so it's a relatively inexpensive dismissal when one considers Wild head coach Bruce Boudreau makes almost 3 times as much, and Ken Holland was just hired as GM of the Edmonton Oilers for a reported $5 million per year. Sources said Leipold and Matchka will immediately launch a GM search, and it's likely that assistant GM Tom Curvers will be named acting GM until a replacement can be found. No other changes in the front office have been made yet, so as of now, Fenton's senior advisor Jack Ferrero remains with the team, as does Fenton's son PJ, who co-ran the draft table. This could be a very expedited GM search because Leipold undergoes surgery on his right hip September 17th, and he surely would want to have somebody in place well in advance of the start of training camp on September 12th and the Traverse City Prospect Tournament on September 6th. During the last search, Leipold and Matchka interviewed a long list of candidates that included Tom Fitzgerald, Penguins assistant GM Bill Guerin, former agent Bill Zito, Bruins executive director of player personnel John Ferguson Jr., and now Lightning GM Julian Breezebaugh, as well as Ducks assistant GM Dave Nonis. After Fenton, it wouldn't be shocking if the Wild decided to go to an experienced route this time. If that's the case, there's really only one small list. Some candidates include former Flyers GM Ron Hextall, former Oilers and Bruins GM Peter Chiarelli, former San Jose Sharks and Kings GM Dean Lombardi, and former Islanders GM Gareth Snow. Hextall, who did good work as an assistant GM in LA and helped build quite the prospect pool in Philly, could be the leading contender. That would be ironic since former Wild GM Chuck Fletcher, who lasted 8 more years in Minnesota than Fenton did, replaced Hextall as Flyers GM. So there you have it. There's all the inside scoop on what was going on behind the scenes. A lot of that we wouldn't have been privy to before. Obviously, there's a lot of unhappy employees, a lot of things going on in the front office that many of us were not aware of. Obviously, I personally haven't been a fan of a lot of the moves that Fenton has made. His trade track record wasn't great, especially the Niederreiter deal. That was horrendous. Some of the signings he made were okay, some of the extensions, but I would not have extended Eric Staal. Out of the signings, of course, signing Zuccarello to a long-term contract this offseason I found weird. I mean, I really like Zuccarello as a player. I think he'll be great, but at the same time, for a player his age, for what he produces, you really want to lock him up, for 5 or 6 years. That just doesn't make sense to me. Obviously, trying to trade Jason Zucker on multiple occasions after just signing him to a 5-year extension also seemed kind of weird to me. He's one of the players who's young enough, fast enough, can score enough that you probably want to keep around. But ultimately, I think this team really does need to go through a rebuild. It's something that a lot of people have been saying for the last couple of years, and they really kind of been pushing to kind of stay relevant and remain a playoff team. But obviously, that's going to be incredibly difficult this year. That Central Division is tougher than ever, and certainly not going to be easy for them to get into playoffs. And certainly would be ironic if Ron Hextall ended up being GM with the Minnesota Wild. But as much as the Flyers were growing impatient with Hextall as GM in Philadelphia, obviously a lot of the things that he did well with there is kind of what Minnesota needs. So personally, I do think it would be a good fit. Of course, it's hard to say at this point if Hextall would be interested or if he'll be on their list of candidates to talk to. But I would not be surprised at all if they do go the route of somebody more experienced. Now, Paul Fenton was looked upon as being a great choice. Him and Leipold knew each other from their days in Nashville. He worked under David Poile, one of the league's best GMs, for I think it was almost 12 years. Before that, he was with Nashville's director of player personnel. So he's got a ton of experience. I really thought he was ready, would have done a great job. But a lot of the moves he's made between the signings and trades have been questionable. And as we've seen at the draft, I did find it a little odd how closely he was being monitored by Leipold. I mean, it's not that unusual to have ownership around, but it did seem to be much more involved. So it certainly had some red flags going up. And obviously there's a lot of other things going on behind the scenes that we didn't know. So let me know what your thoughts are on the Wild firing Paul Fenton. Is it too soon, or did they make the right move before things get worse? And who might be a great candidate to replace him moving forward? As the article said, it could be an expedited search since the owner has surgery coming up here next month. Is going to be out of commission for a little while and won't be so hands-on. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.